Before I could even process what happened, he sprung forward with incredible speed. One moment he was sitting on the ground, the next he was rolling around on the floor with Officer Ryan, beating his face raw. Detective Joss already had her gun out, but I knew she wouldn't get a clear shot without risking shooting Officer Ryan. Instinctively, I yelled, "Don't shoot!" while I dived for the Hermit, tackling him to the concrete. Not only was his strength immense, it felt like his whole body was covered in some sort of oil that prevented me from getting a good grip. I had done some wrestling in my youth, but I was utterly unprepared for the grappling match that ensued. Eventually, he found his way on top, and I could see his massive hands about to swing down when a loud bang rang out. And then another, and then another. Suddenly, I felt a river of pus wash over my face. When the pressure of him sitting on my chest lifted, I hoped to whatever deity may or may not have been out there that Detective Joss had killed it. I received no such relief when we heard that same booming voice command that we leave his home immediately. Looking up, I caught him squirming his way into a vent that led back into the building. Though his whereabouts were absolutely a concern, my immediate attention was drawn to my bloodied partner lying just a few feet away. I scrambled to his side, and the damage was apparent. Cuts, bruises, missing teeth, and a severely broken nose. "Damn it!" I shouted. "Evelyn, help me get him to his feet!" We managed to get Officer Ryan back inside and hand him off to Officer Murray to be taken upstairs and helped by hospital staff. It burned me up inside that I couldn't go with him. It was my call to go in without guns, squarely trained on the Hermit. Because of that stupid decision, Officer Ryan could have easily received permanent brain damage and likely would need plastic surgery. We had a job to do, but it was hard not to wallow in my own foolishness. Detective Joss was kind enough to give me some space and allow me to come to her. It took a few minutes to get myself back together. I found her waiting outside, smoking a cigarette. "Since when are you a smoker?" I asked. She flicked ashes and blew out a bit of smoke. "I'm not. At least, not usually. But the more I go in these cases, the more I find myself lighting up one or two to help me think. Or to just deal with the... you know." She turned towards me and held the lighter out. "I'm trying to stop, so here. I don't have another one, so as long as you have it, I can't smoke." I accepted the gift and leaned next to her against the wall. "So we're gonna find that thing and fill its body full of lead, right?" She shook her head. "I know you want revenge for what it did to Barry. Trust me, I've been where you're at before. But that's not going to work." "The hell do you mean it won't work? He bled or pussed like a stuffed pig when you shot him. Between us two and the officer on standby, we easily have enough ammo to put him down. If not, then we go get bigger guns." "Two of us. Officer Zhang there needs to guard the elevator. Besides, I think the shock of the moment made you miss something, Smith. I had to be within, 20 feet of him? I shot the bastard 3 times with my service pistol. 3 close shots. I was there, and after the pus stopped leaking, no wound." This information froze me. I don't understand. He was obviously hurt. How could there be no wound?" She shrugged. "You ever heard of self-healing fabrics? You can puncture them, but they can fix the hole right after. The bullets definitely went in, but you couldn't tell that by looking at him. If you stand right up after 3 hollow point bullets to the head, how much damage do you really think we could have done? I think the most going in guns blazing would serve to do is annoy him. We need a legitimate solution." That was tough to hear. I wanted revenge for my friend, and I was finally sure that we had a way to kill a horror just this one time. It took me a moment, but I knew I had to resolve myself towards a different method. "Okay, what do we do then?" "Original plan," she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I wanted Barry to operate the security station, but with him gone, I'll have to do it. Keep your radio on, and I'll tell you where on the floor I see him. If we can chase him around until he goes to the door leading to the trucks, then we should be okay. Kind of like leading a fly out the window." Admittedly, I thought it was a horrible plan. I understood the general concept, but playing high-stakes hide-and-seek with a super hermit sounded like a pretty dangerous situation. The danger made itself immediately present when we found him standing at the end of the hallway to the security station. I pointed my gun in his direction and ordered him to stay still. He never broke eye contact as he spoke. "You two are intruders in my home.
You will leave or you will be punished. I will defend my property.
There was a pause, and I shit you not, the fucker started climbing the wall like gravity was optional and slipped into another vent. The apparent breaking of physics didn't seem to bother Detective Joss in the slightest. As soon as he was gone, she went to work pulling up the security cameras. Once she got everything up, she reiterated the plan. Follow her directions and lead him out of the building. We knew that bullets could at least make it feel pain, and the threat of that should have been enough to corral him toward the truck. She remarked about how simple it was, and at first I thought she might be right. It took some time, but eventually we saw movement in the hallway containing the patients' rooms. This was it. As I walked towards my destination, pistol aimed straight forward, I couldn't shake the growing feeling that this would be the furthest thing from simple. Making my way through the door, I had to take stock of my surroundings. Inside, the patients' rooms were open and situated on the right. Simultaneously, there was a mini kitchen, small television, and nurse's desk, all in a small area on the opposite side. A lot to be compacted into an ugly-looking hallway, but ultimately empty. "I'm not seeing anything," I said on my radio. "Did he change locations?"
"Negative. He ducked behind the nurse's station to your left, likely setting up an ambush,"
she replied. I methodically walked towards the counter, being sure to keep my back towards the rooms. My heart thumped in my chest and sweat started to form on my brow. My mind was becoming flooded with all the ways that this could go wrong. When I was level with the desk, I took a deep breath and pivoted towards the desk entrance, screaming for that ugly bastard to get out here. Nothing. Peeking around the corner of the nurse's station, I didn't see anything. All it took was one inquisitive step forward for him to spring from his position inside a hollow compartment of the desk and tackle me to the ground. I immediately felt a sharp pain in my right shoulder. His gums had dislocated from his jaw and shot forward like a goblin shark, sinking sharp teeth into my flesh. My screams of pain only seemed to make it bite down harder. Luckily, I managed to keep hold of the gun in my left hand and fire a couple rounds into the first thing I could find. The pressure on my shoulder lifted, and he reared back in pain, grabbing at his gut. I sprang up and used my good shoulder to ram him into an empty room and shut the door behind him. Luckily for me, one of the few things they had upgraded in the old hospital was the doors. They appear to be badge-locked, meaning unless a staff member came in to let him out, he wouldn't be going anywhere. I was hopeful that that'd give me some time to develop a new strategy, but his constant banging on the door made it hard to think. "Keep smashing away," I yelled. "You're not getting out of there unless I want you to." Right on cue, he went silent. He inspected me for a moment, then pressed his face up to the small window on the door to speak.
"And the only reason you'd want me out is so that you can try and scare me out of my home, right?" What? "Your plan, stupid man," he stated matter-of-factly. "You think you could make me abandon my home? You will run out of bullets. It will hurt me, yes, but if I stand my ground just long enough, you and your friends won't be able to hurt me. I know I can take the pain, but can you survive having your jaw ripped off?"
He paused to spit a yellow fluid at the glass.
"I'm going to hunt you down first."
His threat made me take a step back. He fucking knew. This whole time we would have chased him around to the point of exhaustion, and then he would have struck. Detective Joss's voice came through over the radio.
"Smith, I see you have him contained there. Listen, you need to..."
He knows.
"What?"
He knows the plan. We've got to try something else. I've got him locked up here, but
"Smith, look down and get the hell out of there!"
Confused, I did as I was told and saw two thin fingers beginning to slide out from under the door. Soon after, his hand followed. I didn't have much time to think. I sprinted towards the exit and shut the door behind me. Glancing back through the window in the door, I could see his arm had already made it through. 3 options. The exit? No, he simply wouldn't follow me outside. I could run towards Detective Joss. We could at least hurt him together, but if this guy was basically a living bullet sponge, we'd both eventually be defenseless. Which left one real option. The beginnings of a plan I did not entirely trust started to form in my head. Another quick glance showed I was almost out of time. He was pulling his legs out from under the door, and I knew he'd be gunning right for me. I got on the radio. "Detective Joss, he's coming towards your location. He wants revenge for that gunshot earlier. Take a position outside by the truck." She nodded with a simple,
"Copy."
just in the nick of time. The man was free and barreling towards the door. I sprinted towards the open storage closet. 3 of my steps must have been equal to 1 of his because I could hear him closing the distance with lightning speed. Despite the pain, I opted to dive for the opening, spinning around as I landed and shooting a warning shot in his direction to hopefully slow him down. It did the trick. The bullet missed, but I knew he didn't want to take the unnecessary damage. He ducked behind a water fountain, leaving me enough time to get to my feet, pull out the lighter Detective Joss had given me, and point my gun to one of the oxygen tanks. "Hey, you bastard, get out here!" He raised up slowly and walked towards me. He was ruby red, and I could tell from the look on his face that he was absolutely livid.
"You stupid man. You put yourself into a corner. I'm not afraid of a little fire."
I spat on the ground. I don't give a damn about a little fire. A lot of flammable shit in here, though, don't you think? What do you think happens if I start shooting oxygen tanks while I have this little flame lit? Admittedly, I wasn't even sure if my science was correct, but my bluff seemed to make him take pause.
"What do you plan to do?"
he asked cautiously. "You're obviously an intelligent guy. More intelligent than a lot of the things I've dealt with, so let me put this in terms you'll understand. Oxygen tank plus bullet plus fire equals boom. And when boom happens in an old space with flammable stuff, well, I don't know if you can survive a fiery explosion, but it doesn't matter because your precious home won't."
"No!"
he shouted, throwing his hand forward.
"You'll die too! You wouldn't do this, not to my home!"
He was partially correct. I wouldn't risk hurting the people in the hospital if this crazy plan would have even worked. But that didn't matter so long as he believed I would. I don't give a damn about your home. Either you kill me, or the explosion does. Honestly, I think I prefer this death over whatever the hell you'll do. Plus, it'd be way more satisfying to know that you don't get shit after this. I squeezed my finger on the trigger just a bit. You take another step closer, and I swear to the universe.
"Stop!"
he screamed.
"Don't destroy my home! What do you want?"
Look, I'm a fair guy. There's some new empty houses 6 miles north of here. I'm not sure how you'd plan to get there, but they're empty. So let's make a deal. You can't have this home, but maybe you find yourself one over there. You do that, and we'll leave you to your own devices. He contemplated my offer.
"I go there, and you stay away from my new home?"
I nodded in response. Seconds passed in silence. The sense that I would have to readjust from my bluff seemed to become more real every moment. But eventually, after what felt like minutes of tension, the hermit took off in the other direction without a word. I took the most enormous sigh of relief I had ever had in my life, and flopped onto the ground, grabbing at my shoulder. The pain seemed to be coming on more intensely now. Detective Joss's voice came on through the radio.
"Smith, we saw him come outside, but the little shit went down a storm drain on the sidewalk."
Eventually, I had to fill Detective Joss and the chief in on our conversation. She was displeased that I essentially just shifted the problem somewhere else, and absolutely livid that I changed the plan without telling her. But ultimately, she was proud of me. The chief was more outwardly appreciative of my quick thinking. This way, we knew exactly where he'd be, and we could prepare for his presence. And dealing with him in an empty house seemed far more ideal than dealing with him in a full hospital. Despite all that I had been through, and the loose ends to still tie up, there was still one thing at the forefront of my mind. By the time I finished everything with the chief and the hospital staff, Officer Ryan had already had a room, but I wasn't allowed to see him, at least not officially. I snuck past most of the staff to get to Officer Ryan's room. The ones that saw me didn't ask too many questions given my badge. He was in rough shape and had already been put on some heavy drugs, but he was at least coherent, which was an excellent sign. "Officer Ryan, Barry," I began. "Look, I'm sorry, man. I messed up. I should have known the danger and had us prepared, and all he could muster was a weak shh." The gauze and swelling made it hard for him to talk, the words coming out a bit muffled. I could only imagine how hard it was for him to find the energy, but he fought through the pain and simply said, "Don't blame yourself, man. You did the right thing." I nodded and bent down to put my hand on his shoulder. Knowing I should let him rest, I began to make my way outside, but a weak call stopped me at the door. What's up? I asked, spinning around.
Don't call me Barry, man. It's weird as shit.
I was trying to be respectful, you blonde bastard, but alright. Officer Ryan it is, I replied, smiling. He gave me a thumbs up. Knowing he'd be okay, I finally made my way outside. The night had been awful, and I was more than ready to go home and sleep off the trauma. This is why I was less than thrilled to see a hospital staff member running after me in the parking lot. The woman looked to be in her late 20s, maybe early 30s. She was on the shorter side, with dark brown hair. Her badge signified she was a nurse working at the mental health hospital, which immediately suggested that this would be another situation where someone would ask questions I really didn't want to have to answer. I didn't get the chance for a proper greeting before she was standing in front of me.
You were one of the officers dealing with that guy from earlier, right?
She asked in an accusatory tone. I was, yes. Did you need something? She looked at me like I was crazy.
Did I need something? Are you serious? You know what went down in there and you're just going to play it off?
Not exactly sure what you're referring to, but if you have information you'd like to share, I can give you my—
Bullshit!
She shouted while pointing a finger in my face.
You don't think I know about that old man in the hospital? A human man that scales vertical walls and fits into tiny spaces a child couldn't make it through? Or that fucking voice of his? Your chief comes through and says he was just a homeless man living in a building and expects us to believe it. No! They didn't believe me when I said I saw him. Do you know how terrifying it is to have that thing stare at you from down the hall, just inside the camera's blind spot, only to disappear when you go and get help?
She knew. I wasn't going to convince her that what she saw was normal by any realistic metric. But still, I needed to know exactly where she was going with this. I agree that what you saw was strange, ma'am. But I'm sure there's a rational explanation for all of this. With him in custody, we'll eventually find those answers. But what good does telling me all this do you? She scoffed. What good does it do me? Depends. Getting national media attention for a fucking monster stalking our hospital could bring me some solace. Especially if I knew the police lying about what they saw were grilled by every major outlet in the world. Or you could tell me just what the hell is going on. I knew I couldn't lie my way out of this one. The only thing I really could think to do was try and divert the conversation. You know, storing a bunch of oxygen tanks in an unsafe manner is definitely a breach of OSHA standards. I think the news would be far more interested in that than a silly monster story. I waved my phone in her face to emphasize my point, especially with evidence. But this didn't faze her in the slightest. You think I care? That security guard is a 19-year-old kid. Don't you think I could convince him to pull up footage from today? Hell, I'm sure he'd love to be on TV to say what he's seen. And he's not the only one. Yeah, the oxygen tanks look bad. But which do you really think is going to be a bigger story? Why push this? Why do you want to know so badly? Because! She shouted again. My sister is a patient at the old hospital. What if he had hurt her? What if he had hurt my coworkers or me? I think as someone directly involved, I deserve to at least know. She took a moment to breathe. I'll make this easier. You tell me, and I promise I won't speak a word of it to anyone else. Just please, tell me what's happening. Honestly, at that point, I was done. Emotionally exhausted, physically hurt, and just so fed up with the lies. Who the hell was I to hide something like that? Why should I have to pretend that what we saw was normal, or that it wasn't out there waiting for someone else to get hurt? We're not monster hunters, I get it. But is telling the truth too much to ask? Or at least my version of the truth? At least this one time. That night, I made the decision to tell her. I swore her to secrecy, but I informed her about everything. Honestly, I think it ended up being catharsis for me more than anything. But I'd like to think we both walked away feeling better. Or at least with a greater understanding. She didn't thank me. Not that she needed to. She was owed my truth. Everyone was. And as she walked away, I reflected on what I had done. The fact that there was so much we still didn't know. More monsters, more secrets, more hidden things just outside of where we can see. I can only hope that she used that knowledge to protect herself. Thank you all for giving your time to another one of my stories. I only have a couple more for you, so hopefully you stick with me through these last two. And as always, stay safe, everyone.